Delay, it is my pleasure to introduce the chair for the panel session. My pleasure to introduce Ramya Vivekananda. Many of you probably know Ramya. She is the Senior Education Specialist at the Global Partnership for Education, GPE. Many things to be said about Ramya, but I will just stick to two or three. One is that she herself, of course, has her own family roots in South Asia and in India, in fact. In her previous job as the head of the NECMAP Secretariat, that is the Network for Education Quality Monitoring in Asia and the Pacific, Ramya was proactive in supporting the activities of the PAL network in the region, which basically meant in South Asia. And NECMAP at that time even sponsored a workshop to inviting people who wanted to learn more about this approach to learn about it. And she herself attended that workshop. So she knows us pretty well. Now, GPE currently is, through its various grant windows, is supporting various of the PAL network initiatives and those of PAL network's member countries. And most importantly for today's event, GPE through its Global Knowledge and Innovation Exchange, or KICS grant, is supporting the next phase of ICAN, which in the next 3 years will aim to spread its scope downwards to cover pre-primary, pre-numeracy, as well as early numeracy, and will scale up to more than one district per participating country as well. So Ramya, it is a great pleasure to have you with us this evening, and thank you for joining us all the way from Washington, DC, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Suman. I hope that everybody can hear me okay. Good morning from Washington, DC. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces and friends in South Asia, as well as all over the world. I have really the honor and privilege of moderating, of chairing this panel discussion. Before we actually get to it, though, I'd just like to say a few introductory background words, just to tell you firstly a bit more about the Global Partnership for Education, and why we're so excited to be working with the PAL network and supporting the ICAN tool. So as some of you may know, GPE is in fact a multi-stakeholder partnership that works with close to 70 developing country partner governments, as well as donor governments, civil society organizations, such as the PAL network, teachers associations, the private sector, philanthropy, international organizations. We're working collectively now with almost 70, what we call developing country partners, all around the globe, low income and lower middle income countries. We're working also with almost all of the countries of South Asia. So this part of the world is very much one of our focus areas. And in all of our work, we're essentially supporting countries to strengthen their education systems by developing and implementing education sector plan. However, in addition to our work at the country level, whereby really improving learning outcomes is, I would say, front and center to everything that we do. And I think it's a primary concern now for all of us all around the world. We also believe firmly that we can't improve learning without actually being able to understand it, being able to measure and track children's learning outcomes. So it's a theme for us globally. It's a theme for us in our country work. And as Suman said, we have recently launched a new initiative, global initiative called the Knowledge and Innovation Exchange, or KICS. And KICS is working specifically to connect the expertise, innovation, and knowledge of GPE partners to help our developing country partners to build stronger education systems. So KICS is essentially, on the one hand, supporting a number of global and regional initiatives to produce, integrate, and scale knowledge and innovation in our partner countries. So this includes, we're very pleased to say, this includes a global grant to the PAL network in partnership with the Pratham Education Foundation and the Australian Council for Educational Research to develop and implement the ICAN tool to scale it up, as Suman said. So I think it's very relevant. I think it's very relevant for us to be here.
Hello.
And so it gives me great pleasure, in fact, to introduce the distinguished panelists who will be a part of our conversation this evening or this morning, where you are in the world. Maybe if everyone could just mute, I'm getting a bit of feedback here.
Sorry.
No worries. So our distinguished panelists, we have 4 of them, and in alphabetical order by surname. We have Dr. Rukmini Banerjee, who I think needs no introduction, but who is the Chief Executive Officer, the CEO of the Pratham Education Foundation. She's been with Pratham for over 20 years, since 1996, and has extensive experience in the field, working directly with communities, as well as implementing large-scale partnerships with governments. Before becoming CEO of Pratham in 2015, she led the organization's research and assessment efforts, including ASER, for almost a decade. We are also joined by Dr. Marguerite Clark, who is World Bank Senior Education Specialist, based in Delhi, so also in South Asia. Dr. Marguerite Clark leads the bank's work on learning assessment and has more than 20 years of experience working with countries around the globe to strengthen their assessment systems. Prior to joining the bank, Marguerite taught at universities in Australia and the United States, and has also worked as an elementary and secondary school teacher in both Ireland and Japan. Then we're also honored to have Dr. Shehzad Jiba, who serves on the one hand as chairman of the Inter-Board Committee of Chairmen, the IBCC in Pakistan. So he's based in Pakistan. The IBCC focuses specifically on certification and validation of higher secondary exams. But Dr. Jiba is also director of the Aga Khan University Examination Board, where he also holds a joint appointment as assistant professor of Faculty of Arts and Sciences. Dr. Jiba also plays an active role in improving the education system in Pakistan, working as a consultant with various bodies, including the ADB, DFID, the EU, and several provincial governments in Pakistan. Then we're joined in Bangladesh by Asif Salah, who is the executive director of BRAC Bangladesh, and he has been with BRAC since 2011, working in the areas of advocacy for social change, information technology, communications, and social innovation. Prior to joining BRAC, Dr. Salah worked as a policy specialist with the Access to Information, or A2I program, at the Prime Minister's office. And previously, he worked for many years in the finance and tech sectors in New York and London. So it's so exciting to have this distinguished panel with us, with speakers from India, from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and the World Bank. So we decided as a group that what we would do is, instead of having each of the panelists make a separate intervention, we're going to rather have a round robin style session, where I will ask a series of questions and essentially call upon a couple of the panelists to offer their thoughts in relation to those. So we hope to structure this such that we'll have ample time at the end for discussion, for questions and answers. So I would just like to remind our dear panelists to be concise and brief in your answers, limiting each question to about 5 minutes. So without further ado, let's start. So we've heard from Suman and Ketan and from the leaders of the PAL network in South Asia that the citizen-led and household-based assessment approach was born, in fact, in this part of the world, in India. And it's one of the things that I've always been so impressed to see is how it's gradually and organically spread to 3 continents, I think to 14 countries, as we heard. So it's really a remarkable story. And you know, I've been so privileged to be associated with this work in some way over the last years. So I'd like to hear from Dr. Rukmini, as well as Dr. Marguerite Clark, to ask that, in your view, what is the true value of the citizen-led approach? And why is it particularly relevant in your view to the South Asian context? So maybe we can start with Dr. Rukmini and then turn it over to Marguerite.
Thank you so much, Ramya. It's really just amazing to be with everyone here today. And although we are constrained because of COVID, in a way, because of this, we can actually reach out and have many, many partners with us, which we could not have had if it was this was a physical event. It's a little hard, to talk about your own baby because it just seems like the most obvious thing to have done. But we felt for many years in Pratham that while not going to school is a very visible thing, when children are in school and having difficulty with learning, it's quite invisible. And so it's important to have a way to bring that out in a way that is both constructive and helpful and inclusive. And so the ASER tool was really born not out of a need to do assessment, but it was born out of Pratham's efforts to see how we could help children who had been in school for a couple of years, but were still struggling to read or to do basic arithmetic, and how to develop a common terminology and a common approach so that a large number of people at that time within Pratham who were working with these kids would be able to compare notes, be able to develop a common approach and share progress. And so really, if I go back and think almost 20 years ago, the tool was just a way for us to organize ourselves, was a way for us to communicate to parents, because often parents would ask you, what are you doing? How far do you think you're going to get? And so the story that we have, the longest text that we have in the ASER tool, was a way to communicate this was our goal. This is where we wanted to take all children who were not yet at that level. And if you read that story aloud in any language, everyone, those who can read and those who can't, can understand what this is about. So for us, the simplicity of the tool, the ability to explain this to anyone, the possibility of doing this with very large numbers of children, all meant that you were really, in some ways, this was a very important step for us to really think about learning for all. And so we developed this for ourselves, for Pratham to begin with, to think about how can we really help children learn to read quickly and how can we help to build math. But over the years, we've seen that this made sense not just to us, but to many other people, both in India as well as in other countries. And I think that in the initial years when Bela, when Sarah would come to India, I was always surprised that something that it's sort of like you were cooking in your own kitchen to feed your own kids, and that dish should be tasty for many other people seemed like like a fantastic thing. So I'll stop there and hand it back to you, Ramya.
Great, thank you, Rukmini. Marguerite, are you with us? And did you have any thoughts on this question?
Yes, hi Ramya, I'm here. The value of citizen-led assessment, I think part of the clue to that is in the name, the fact that it's citizen-led, and thus it's representing the power of a country's citizens to take action to improve learning outcomes. You're not waiting for government or others to act. Citizens are taking it into their own hands to act so that their children can learn. And I think there's a real power and value to that. As I was thinking about ICAN and citizen-led assessment, this phrase kept going through my mind of the people, by the people, for the people. And that's actually from a quote by US President Abraham Lincoln, where he talks about government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So I think really citizen-led assessment is assessment of the people, by the people, for the people. And that is a real value that it brings to the table. I think citizen-led assessment is also valuable because in ways it represents liberating or freeing the assessment process from technical elites. A lot of the large scale assessments that we know are developed by testing organizations, and they're proprietary to those organizations. They tend to be very technically complex. They analyze and report data in pretty obtuse ways. But citizen-led assessment, it tends to be more transparent on many levels. It's easier. Citizens are collecting the information, using instruments they themselves understand. They're analyzing and reporting the data in ways that regular people understand. And therefore, I think it helps people buy into the data more in some ways and empowers them. I think another value that citizen-led assessment has brought to the table is that it focuses on assessing students both in and out of school. And other assessments are school-based. So you're missing a lot of those kids that are out of school, and household-based assessment, like citizen-led assessment, it fills in that black hole of data that exists with a lot of other school-based assessment. And I think that's particularly relevant for South Asia, where there are so many children out of school. I think you need an assessment that's going to capture those both out of school and in school, so that governments have a better sense of the true picture of learning levels in their countries. So I think I'll stop there and hand it back to you, Ramya. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Marguerite. I really like that analogy of the people by the people and for the people. So hopefully we'll be able to come back to that theme a bit. So a second question, and I'd like to turn this one over to Asif Salah and Dr. Shehzad Jiba. So you've heard the presentation from Ketan and all of the other information shared. So I'm curious to know what you think could be the potential of the ICAN tool in your respective countries, in Bangladesh and in Pakistan, especially in relation to other existing tools or assessments that you may have to measure numeracy, particularly of young children. So can we hear from Dr. Salah first, Asif Salah?
Thank you, Ramya. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here today. I always have to attend many different types of forums as a part of my role at BRAC, but I really enjoy the ones which involves education, because there is a sense of movement and that we are all in it together, and that's a sense of camaraderie. So it's always very heartening to be amongst friends in education. Rukmini is a dear friend, and I've been a big fan of ASER for a long time, but have not been able to scale that up in Bangladesh, unfortunately. We tried that with our friend Saeed, and who's now involved in ASER Bangladesh. But unfortunately, when we did a small sort of advocacy effort, when we tried to launch the result, our then education minister didn't take it very kindly. So, but these are all very familiar to Rukmini, dealing with these kinds of fallout, and it all depends on how you frame it. So we backed out after that, we thought that we're gonna take a little bit of time, step back, and see how we can do it more in a more sort of way where it can be a more engagement with the government. But I think the reason I'm a big fan of this tool is exactly what was said, that it's what Rukmini said. It's simple, it's scalable, and it's very, very contextual, right? So that's the first thing I would say, that we don't really have anything else like this in Bangladesh, which beyond the sort of the government testing mechanism, which actually assesses the basic foundational skills. And particularly around this time, when we are all sort of thinking around 21st century skill sets and other things, the fundamental challenge of that, what are our students learning? Are they learning the basic literacy and numeracy skills that are required to go to that next level even? I mean, are we getting our basics right? I mean, that's what essentially this tool asks that question, and gives us a picture of where we are, so that we can solve the problem. And essentially, if you understand the problem, that's half your problem solved. So that's I think what we also lack in Bangladesh, that, this kinds of assessment, which can really give a true picture of what Margarita said, both not just people at school, but also children who are out of school as well, in terms of where they are standing. I mean, there are a number of these initiatives, the new initiatives that are coming in, and which brings me to the second point of why this is very useful from a citizen's perspective, which is that how we are allocating our resources. I mean, essentially, every year when the budgeting happens, we get into this sort of discussion around what percentage of GDP is being spent on education versus...
Hear the interpreter, but I can't hear the presenter.
Okay. So
really sorry, please go on. Really sorry about that.
Yeah, so somebody's having trouble with listening. Okay, I'll just carry on. The policy aspect is very important, that in terms of how this money is or the resources are being spent by the government, is not very clear to all of us, right? I mean, to the citizens. And again, if we identify the challenges better from the citizens' perspective, I think that's basically makes this whole sort of process much more sort of demand-driven rather than supply-driven. I think, and it's a common complaint perhaps across the region, that the bulk of the education budget actually gets spent on hardware, building and making buildings, procuring items, rather than the software, rather than the training of the teachers, rather than looking at pedagogy and all that. And part of this is that because there is this lack of discussion and conversation around the quality of education, and what do we understand about quality of education, which is also the third point that I'm going to bring in, which is the involvement of parents, involvement of the community in this process. Because oftentimes the conversation around quality of education in this part of the world, as you all know, that it's around GPA, it's around whether they can go to the next level, it's whether they're getting full score, but rather than focusing on what they're actually learning, right? So because of the tool actually involves the parents and the community, they can actually see how their children are doing in front of them and through this assessment tools. So this kind of engagement actually also does this other sort of subtle thing of asking a different questions to the parents, that are you happy with what your children is learning? What they should be, where they should be versus where they are at, they can see that difference instantly. And I think the fourth point I was going to bring in is that essentially, again, I think this is a challenge that every country in this region is facing. The fundamental challenge is around assessment. We don't simply have any good way to assess the quality of learning, quality of education that is happening. And I think to a certain extent, ASER solves that purpose. And I think it, tools like ICAN, it brings into the conversation that the different kinds of conversation, that where are we going wrong? Where are we at? What should we focus at? And essentially brings a different dimension to the conversation, so which is very, very important. Oftentimes, this quality of education is very, very vague to us, and people's perception around quality of education also varies very much. And a huge part, like of organizations like us for BRAC, has been that also advocacy with the parents, that it's not about GPA, it's not about just looking at the report card and checking off, or competing with other parents on how your children did. It's also a lot about really, really asking the right question, that is your child learning the right things? So I think that's fundamentally changes that as well. So I'll stop here and then hear from Shehzad as well.
Yes, Shehzad, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. You might hear background noise. There are 5 children playing. So I apologize for that. I would first like to say thank you to inviting me in this forum to give my thoughts. But with the broad question that you've asked, let me respond first by saying that, I think that this is a great milestone for South Asian region to have a common and comparable assessment tool to measure the student learning outcomes that are aligned at international standards, that is the UNESCO's global proficiency framework. Moreover, what I was happy to see that it follows the international standards on data collection, which is very, very critical to ensure reliability of the data that is to be analyzed. There are other unique features that it is open for all. It is available in multiple languages. It is cost effective. It is flexible, and that is, it can be used for household based assessment, or it can also be used in school-based settings. But for me, the fundamental question, which I think Marguerite has also highlighted, is that why do we want to do assessment? And Asif Bhai has also highlighted on that. And the second area that I would like to highlight is on why at the foundational level. And then I will touch upon why it is significant for the country like Pakistan. Assessment in education is a process where you measure learning against a certain yardstick, that is the student learning outcomes defined in a curriculum. Those who are in this business very well know that the accurate measurement of learning is a complex process. Let me give an example. If you want to measure height or weight, you will use a measuring tape or a weighing scale to measure either height or the weight. But if the tool has some kind of error, or the person does not know how to use the tool, or both the tool and the person has fault, then the results you will get will not be reliable, and it will give you false measurement. Asif Saab mentioned correctly that globally, educational assessment to measure student learning is a big challenge, and that is due to capacity issues as well. It is not well practiced in the classroom and also in high-stake examinations. The measuring tool used measures usually the knowledge level content and does not measure high-order thinking, that is the conceptual learning of the child. This eventually leads to the poor classroom practices where teacher and students' focus is on memorization. And eventually the true aspirations that is set by the curriculum is never achieved. And in short, assessment or poor assessment drives poor learning. In Pakistan, and I'm sure in many other countries, as I said earlier, that this measurement of learning is a big challenge at all levels. In Pakistan, I'd like to highlight here that we have some good examples that, one is the Aga Khan University Examination Board, which take high stakes examination at secondary and higher secondary level, where its assessment and examination meets international standards, while its project-based learning in the middle school years that focuses on assessment of 21st century skills has made a dent in channelizing the schools to move away from rote learning culture at an early stage. Overall, by and large, the system of education in my country continues to outplay the society at large, where the assessment is driving the system towards a rote learning culture. In Pakistan, we have some organizations, the government organizations, which are assessing or started to assess students' learning at an early age, which is at the terminal level of the primary and the terminal level of the middle school. One is Punjab Examination Commission, the other is Balochistan Assessment and Examination Commission. In the Sindh province, we used to have SATs, and in the provincial level, we used to have National Examination and Assessment System. Both the laters have been non-operational due to budgetary issues. Since I'm the board of director of Punjab Examination Commission, and I can tell you that testing has been taking place at the terminal levels for many years now, but unfortunately, the findings of those assessments have never been shared with the stakeholders, and therefore no intervention actions were taken. However, now with the new assessment policy in the province of Punjab, in which I played a role as well, we now have done away with the pass and fail system at the the level of primary at grade 5 and grade 8. It is now more focused on school-based assessment, large-scale based, sample-based assessment, and formative assessment. So the approach is more on diagnostic and not on pass and fail. The Aga Khan board has also been involved in capacity development of Balochistan Assessment and Examination Commission through UNICEF and European Union funding for now over 2 years. And I believe Balochistan will also embark upon an assessment policy similar to Punjab that will focus on diagnostic approach and rather than on pass and fail. ASER Pakistan, if I'm not wrong, is the only organization which has assessed literacy and numeracy at these levels for many years now, and I have been following that very much, and the benchmark is based on the national curriculum of the country. And they have used very well the findings and the results for strong advocacy. Its findings have been an eye-opener for the government, NGOs, donor agencies, and public at large to understand the urgency. What Asif Saab said, Rukmani said that, students are going to school, but they are not learning. But the kind of work ASER Pakistan have done, and I don't want to take any credit away from the government, and Bela would vouch that some progress has been made through some kind of intervention, but because of these kinds of reports. So the lesson learned is that a good assessment tool, if we are able to diagnose a problem more accurately and find a better solution. And now with this ICAN tool, I mentioned about the yardstick is at the international standards, and also the data collection is also meeting the international level. It may turn out that we find that we have a common problem and we can collectively work to find a common solution. Maybe SARC can play a role to unite all South Asian countries to have a common assessment at foundational level and carried out every 2 or 3 years. God knows, at least in this area, common good will be achieved. In Pakistan, I would encourage that this can play a significant role, and I would encourage private schools to use this tool, and also the provincial and the federal government for the purpose of diagnostic. Because developing such a tool is complex, as discussed earlier, an expensive activity. So rather reinventing the wheel and spending more, use a tool which is free of cost, which is flexible and aligned to the international standards. In the end, I would say that you have every reason to win. It will do a good diagnostic assessment and give you a system level feedback, telling you what is working and what is not working at the foundational year of the student. Over to Ramya.
Thank you so much. So just to flag that we are starting to run short of time. However, the questions that we've gotten so far actually touch on some of the questions that I had. So we're going to try to combine a little bit, but I would maybe just ask for the couple of remaining questions for all of our panelists to be really short, maybe a minute each, if that's possible. So one of the questions has already been touched on a bit in terms of the response from Shehzad Ji. So this is in terms of the potential of ICAN, both for its potential as a regional assessment mechanism for South Asia. And we've had a question, for example, asking about what might be the effects and impact of a common tool with reference to the future of any particular country's, I presume, assessment practices and system. So what about the regional piece of it? And then also, as Ketan alluded to, what do you think is the potential of ICAN for reporting on the global learning targets, the SDG 4.1.1? So maybe we can start by hearing from Marguerite, and then Rukmini, if you'd have anything to add, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Ramya. So I think the ICAN tool has potential both for the SDG 4.1.1a reporting and as a regional assessment mechanism. But I think a few adaptations may need to take place in order to fully get there. So let me give you specifics. In terms of the SDG reporting, the tool is already very well aligned with the Global Proficiency Framework for 4.1.1a. That's a great start. And you're able to map a minimum proficiency level against it. Great foundation. However, in order for ICAN to be used as a way for countries to consistently report on their progress in terms of more students reaching minimum proficiency, in numeracy in grades 2 to 3, there will need to be a shift from ICAN as a single open source tool to ICAN as a program, an assessment program that develops multiple versions of ICAN over time that can be used by countries to measure change. And this is because if you have one open source tool, so we've all seen the ICAN tool in the presentation, we can go to the website and download it. That's great if you want to do more low stakes grassroots assessment efforts. But once you start talking about system level monitoring and reporting, you need to have a situation where you can create multiple versions of the assessment, that you know the items that you're about to administer are secure, people haven't already seen them, because you want to make sure that students haven't learned the answers, that they're being given new questions that they haven't seen before. So I think that there's already a great foundation with this current open source tool, but there needs to be this next phase of, okay, how can we have ICAN turn into a program where every year we're going to have a different version of the questions mapped to the same framework, but something that countries can buy into and use. Another area where more work needs to be done in order to meet these requirements for the SDG 4 monitoring and for the regional assessment is in the area of the sample design, that it needs to move to a stage where it's nationally representative. I know the team's already thinking about that, but thought's going to need to be given to that in terms of, is it going to be a school-based or a household-based nationally representative sample? Most assessments out there are school-based, nationally representative. How is ICAN going to move forward to have a nationally representative sample, whatever modality it takes, school or household based? Another thing, in order to have this be a full package that can report on the grades 2 and 3 learning levels for SDG 4, it would be great to have a reading assessment equivalent of ICAN. You could call it ICAR, International Common Assessment of Reading, although it's not quite as eloquent as ICAN. So I think, those are a few boxes that still need to be ticked. It certainly has good room as a regional assessment mechanism as well. Although here, I think there might need to be some further work to see how well it aligns with the curricula of the countries in South Asia, because that's what most regional assessments do. Their assessment framework is built around the curricula and learning standards of the participating countries, whereas ICAN is more mapped to the global proficiency framework. So again, something to look at there. But I think the bottom line for me is, yes, it has great potential for both of these system level uses, and maybe moving forward, we want a bifurcated approach. You want an open source tool that's going to be accessible to citizens, educators, and others for the more informal grassroots level efforts. And then you want something that's a more secure program that you can tap into for these system level efforts. And I'll end there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Marguerite. I think these are all really important considerations, and you've given a lot of food for thought for our colleagues at the PAL network. Rukmini, did you have some thoughts also on the regional assessment piece or global reporting?
So I'd like to just add, I think what Marguerite says, all of that is true, but I'd like to bring in sort of the people element back into it again. I think the spread of the ASER model to so many countries happened in a quite a unique way, that it was taken up by ordinary people, and a sharing that happened really from the bottom and laterally. Whereas a lot of the other assessments in the world, the model is that it starts either in Paris or in Washington or in New York, and there is a set of people who design this, as Marguerite put it, technical elite. So our region has probably, if we put all our children together, one of the biggest lot of children that we have in the world. And it would be fantastic if, as people in these countries, and we have seen across our countries that you can do a nationally representative and a technically sound, as well as a cheap and engaging way to look at our own children. And so my desire would be that we should do something across all our countries. We should do it voluntarily. We should look at how this all fits into our curricular patterns and so on. But in India particularly, we feel that there is a very good opportunity. The government has declared a foundation, a national mission for foundational literacy and numeracy. There is a real attempt to think about how do you involve parents and community members in thinking about how our children could go ahead. And so you imagine if we had, millions of children for whom we help to raise the bottom up to a certain level. And I think that if you can build that foundation across South Asia, it would have I'm a lapsed economist. I can't calculate what this would do to the productivity of the whole world, but I think it would do a huge amount. And it could also serve as a model for many other parts of the world where the problems are similar. So in addition to what Marguerite and I think Abraham Lincoln said about of the people and by the people, I have been adding one thing which says, not just that it's I can, but we can and we will.
Thank you. I love that. We can and we will. So we have obviously a huge challenge on our hands now. So I'd like to turn to a bit of discussion about the COVID context, because we can't ignore that. So we know that UNSG Antonio Guterres actually said that the world is facing a generational catastrophe because of school closures during the coronavirus pandemic. So I'm curious to know a bit more about how the education sector in your countries is responding to COVID-19, and whether you think that ICAN can help to assess learning in this context, either during the time of school closure or upon school reopening. And we've actually had a couple of questions in the chat alluding to this point, asking, for example, whether we can assess students remotely, given the COVID crisis. There was also a question from Anil Kanji from South Africa. Hello, Anil. Asking whether and how the tool can be used by teachers when schools reopen, given issues of curriculum coverage. So I thought it would be interesting to hear from Shehzad and Asif in this regard, in terms of where Pakistan and Bangladesh are in light of COVID issues and the potential of ICAN. So just a reminder to be quite brief and concise. Shehzad, maybe you can start us off.
Yes, I'll be very brief. Just to give you context, in 2005, we had a huge earthquake in the north of the country. And because of that, 14 weeks of school closure took place in a certain region of Pakistan. There was a study done to understand the learning loss, and the study showed that with the 14 weeks of school closure, there was a learning loss of 1.5 to 2 years. And we already have seen almost 5 months of schools that have been closed, and the damage certainly has been done. How much that damage has been done, we don't know. We need to measure that. And I think ICAN can play a role here to understand this, the damage, before we allow students to move forward. Using those findings, we can either trim the curriculum or make an accelerated curriculum for the students, because we know when the school will start, even if the curriculum has been trimmed down, there will be certain amount of learning loss, that knowledge has been lost. And we know teachers would be pressurized by the system to complete whatever the curriculum is. And this could lead to a lot of stress and anxiety among children, because at the end of the day, what Asif Saab was saying is it's all about marks in our region. You know, how much marks you took, the parents also pressurize the child. So it is very critical to know for this academic year and probably the next academic year, how are we going to manage our curriculum load so that we can continue the education system the way we used to do in the past years. So I'll stop over here.
Great, Asif.
Yeah, I'll just, I think Shahzad Bhai has mentioned everything, which is also very much relevant to Bangladesh's needs as well. But just to kind of add is that, I think just to step back, I mean, there are big dilemma for policymakers right now, when to open the schools, like everywhere else. And if we look at Bangladesh, the schools are closed since March. So it's almost, this is the 6th month. And we are unlikely to open this month, and potentially even things improve sometime in September. Then we're just looking at part of September, October, November, 3 months of schooling. And then we only got about February, because in end of January, the school starts. So we only got 4 months. Now, the decision point is that even if with the curtailed syllabus, if they get promoted, but what they have lost, they haven't, what they have not learned this year, they have not learned this year. So that's going to carry on to next year as well, and they're going to suffer next year as well, going back to that learning game. You may pass, you may go to the next class, but what you have not learned, you have not learned. So essentially, we can't fool ourselves at the end of the day. So also a decision for the government is that whether this year will be repeated to next year as well, but that's going to be a very extremely political decision. But we need numbers, we need data, we need evidence in terms of where we are. And that's where I feel that ICAN can be done in a quick, scalable way. And it's citizen-led, so we can also have that conversation around how much the damage has been. So based on which further decisions can be taken about the next few months. Because I mean, whatever we are doing in terms of in the new normal, there will be a lot of adjustment. And there has been, as Shahzad Bhai has said, that there has been a significant, if you extrapolate that learning from Pakistan after the earthquake, the numbers that you saw in Ebola, during Ebola in Liberia and Sierra Leone, that these gaps are devastating for students because it steps them back for a long period of time. So we really need to assess that. We need the evidence before we take political challenging decisions, so that we can also convince if the decision is a tough decision for the people to take on. Thank you.
Great, thank you. It's interesting that you brought up the issue of the school closures that happened during the Ebola time, because I think that for GPE, for example, we're trying to facilitate the learning of lessons and sharing across countries, and that includes drawing upon the rich experience of Sierra Leone and others to respond to that particular crisis. So we're just about at time, but I just wanted to give a last chance to our panelists to simply tell us, if possible, if you could express, each of you, just one wish in one sentence. So here we go, a bit of a challenge. But if you could express just one sentence, one wish for what you would like to see happen in terms of understanding the learning of all children in the region, especially in this new reality that we're all living in the COVID-19 world, what would that wish be? Rukmini.
I would love for every child in this region to be able to read a story that they liked every day.
Great. Marguerite.
My wish is that all children in the region, no matter where they live, who their family is, would realize their potential as a human being, and hopefully assessment can help them achieve that. Thanks.
Asif.
Yeah, I mean, I wish that every single children has the same opportunity that my children had. So that's essentially education is the glass barrier, the glass breaker. So I wish that they get the same opportunity in terms of learning. Thank you.
Great. And last but not least, Shehzad Ji.
I wish that this year and in many other years, in the coming years, children enjoy the process of learning. And that can be done by good assessment.
Wonderful, thank you.
Ramya, we want to hear your wish as well.
My wish, well, you've said it all, I think all of you, but my wish is also that we keep this conversation going. Because I think, this is, we had the global launch last month, and now it's been really great to hear these perspectives from South Asia. But I think there's so much potential and so much excitement around what this tool can do at the level of the region and at the level of the globe, in fact. So we're really excited to support. We did have a couple of questions that came up that we didn't have time, I think, to fully address, but